For a quarter of a century, the Miami Dolphins have been more than just a football team. They've kind of been a masterclass in how not to run an organization. And this isn't just about losing a few games here and there. No, this is about a deep, systemic rot that's created one of the most frustrating stories in all of pro sports. So let's get into it. Let's break down the anatomy of this 25-year failure.
Just look at that number, 25. 25 years. The last time the Miami Dolphins actually won a playoff game was way back on December 30th, 2000. That is the longest active drought in the entire NFL. To put that in perspective for you, the iPhone didn't even exist yet. Tom Brady had never started an NFL game. It's just an incredible amount of time to go without a single postseason victory.
So how does something like this even happen? I mean, really? Well, that's what we're digging into here. This is not a string of bad luck. It's not a few bad bounces of the ball. What we're going to break down is how this drought is actually the predictable, almost inevitable result of some deep institutional problems that just feed into one another, year after year after year. And it really all starts at the very top. The first piece of this puzzle, the first layer of failure, is what we're calling the instability engine. Because look, before you can build a winning team on the field, you have got to have a clear, coherent vision off of it. And that's something the Dolphins have completely, totally lacked. You know, think about the greatest dynasties in sports for a second. What do they all have in common? Stability, right? The Steelers, the Patriots, the Chiefs, they are built on a consistent vision from a head coach who's there for years and years. The Dolphins, on the other hand, well, they've churned through 10 different head coaches since 2004. That means a new voice, a new system, a new philosophy practically every couple of seasons. How are you supposed to build anything that lasts that way?
And what's wild is that the chaos goes even deeper than just the head coach. It's not just who's in charge, but how they're in charge. Just look at the power structure itself. For a while, the coach has the final say. Then, nope, they bring in a football czar to oversee everybody. Then, actually, it's the GM's turn. Then it's a bizarre power triangle with 3 people in charge. You can't possibly build a coherent team identity when the person drawing up the blueprint keeps changing every few years.
And this really shows you the true cultural cost of all that instability. So in 2022, the owner, Stephen Ross, fired coach Brian Flores right after he delivered back-to-back winning seasons, which was the first time the team had done that in almost 20 years. And the reason they gave? A lack of collaboration. The message that sent throughout the entire league was just shocking. In Miami, winning football games could actually be less important than playing politics in the front office.
So when you have that much chaos at the top, it's going to trickle down to the most important position on the field. And that brings us to the second massive layer of failure, the quarterback quagmire, a 25-year nightmare of trying and failing to replace the legendary Dan Marino.
24. Since the year 2000, 24 different quarterbacks have started a game for the Miami Dolphins. That is just a staggering list of journeymen, draft busts, and one-year stopgaps. This isn't just about failing to find one guy, it's a complete, systemic inability to evaluate, draft, and develop talent at the single most critical position in all of sports.
And if you want to pinpoint one single moment where it all just went catastrophically wrong, this is it. March 2006. The coach at the time, Nick Saban, had a choice between 2 quarterbacks coming off of injuries, Drew Brees and Dante Culpepper. The Dolphins medical staff failed Brees on his physical, so they went and traded for Culpepper instead. The rest is just painful history. Brees goes on to become a Super Bowl champion, a first-ballot Hall of Famer in New Orleans. Culpepper starts 4 games for Miami before his career completely fizzles out. That one decision literally altered the course of 2 different franchises for more than a decade.
And look, this failure to get talent wasn't just about the quarterbacks. To build a sustainable winner, you absolutely have to hit on your first-round draft picks. These are the cheap, cornerstone players your team is built around. But this right here shows a pattern of just catastrophic misses. They took a return specialist, Ted Ginn Jr., right before future Hall of Famers Patrick Willis and Darrelle Revis came off the board. They took Charles Harris 8 picks before the perennial Defensive Player of the Year TJ Watt. It's just brutal.
But the one that really broke the fans' brains was Deion Jordan. In 2013, the Dolphins didn't just pick him, they actually traded up to the number 3 spot to grab a player who was a complete bust. This quote from a fan just perfectly captures that deep, lasting frustration of watching your team not just fail, but fail spectacularly by trying to outsmart everyone else in the room.
So what happens when you have zero stability at the top and you keep whiffing in the draft? Well, you get desperate. And that desperation brings us to our third layer of failure, a deeply flawed team-building strategy that has basically trapped the franchise in football purgatory.
This is the concept that really defines the last 25 years for the Dolphins. They are perpetually stuck in the middle. They spend just enough or win just enough games to finish around 8 or 9 wins. That keeps them from getting a truly game-changing #1 overall draft pick, but they are never, ever a real threat to actually win a Super Bowl. It is the absolute worst place to be in the NFL. So how do you get stuck there?
By trying to buy a shortcut. And a perfect example of this is the Endamukong Suh contract back in 2015. They made him the highest-paid defender in NFL history. Now, Suh himself, he played fine. But just look at this. His salary took up almost 19% of the team's entire salary cap. The average for Super Bowl winner's top player, just over 9%. He was eating up the resources that could have paid for 2 or 3 other quality starters, and it completely crippled their ability to build a deep roster.
And here's the kicker. They didn't learn their lesson. At all. The current front office repeated the exact same mistake from 2022 to 2024. They traded away multiple first-round picks, their most valuable assets for building a team, and then handed out these enormous contracts to star players from other teams like Tyreek Hill and Bradley Chubb. They tried to build the team from the outside in, and all it did was create a top-heavy, expensive, and really fragile roster. And this slide right here, this visualizes the entire trap. This is the cycle that has defined the Miami Dolphins for a whole generation. It starts with failing in the draft. That failure forces you to panic and spend huge money on veterans. That cripples your salary cap, which means you can only afford to be mediocre. That mediocrity ensures you get a middling draft pick, and then you start the whole vicious cycle all over again.
Okay, so let's bring it all together now. Because these aren't separate problems we've been talking about. They're all part of one interconnected disease. This is the perfect storm of failure that creates what seems like a completely unbreakable cycle.
This is it. This is the entire 25-year anatomy of failure, all on one slide. It starts with an impatient owner, which creates that revolving door of coaches and GMs. That constant churn leads to a totally broken draft process. The draft failures then force the team into these desperate, quick-fix free agency moves, which ultimately leads to nothing more than sustained mediocrity. Each step just logically flows right into the next.
And all of that brings us to today. The team's disastrous 2-7 start to the 2025 season shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. It's just the bill finally coming due. The quarterback they bet the franchise on has regressed, the expensive roster they bought is now old, and because of all those trades for veterans, they're lacking the high-end draft picks they need to actually rebuild. This is the inevitable, predictable endpoint of that cycle of mediocrity we just walked through.
So that leaves us with the ultimate question, doesn't it? After a quarter century of the same patterns, the same mistakes, the same results, what will it finally take to fix something this broken? Is it a new owner, a new GM, or does it require a level of patience and long-term vision that this organization has proven time and time again that it simply doesn't have?